Hello and welcome back to Under Review. We have quite a big game to talk about. National championship rematch, South Carolina versus UConn yesterday, and we have on a very special guest, SNY's Marino. Thank you so much for coming on again.
Of course, Bri. Thanks for having me.
We knew this was going to be a big matchup, a big revenge game for the Huskies. In the pregame availability on Friday, Nika Mule kept saying they had to punch first because during last year's national championship, they were down 22-8 in that first quarter. This time around, they certainly did punch first, being up 25-14 on Sunday after the first quarter. What were your thoughts on the beginning of the game?
I don't think UConn could have played a better first quarter. They were clearly prepared, as they tend to be under Gino Auriemma and his staff. And he had a really great game plan and they were executing it. And that's really what you expect from UConn. And it's something that they've done for the most part pretty well. That's kind of in their MO, come out fast and get off to a big lead and then try to hang on to it. They did that, in the first quarter. And the only problem was you got the sense that at some point they were going to start to wear down, and that's pretty much what happened.
I completely agree. We knew that they would have this 5 to 6 person roster kind of playing the whole game, and South Carolina has 9-10 people playing, so it was going to happen where exhaustion was going to kick in. UConn's depleted bench was definitely a weakness South Carolina was going to capitalize on, and it proved to be a problem. South Carolina having 37 bench points, UConn having 0. How much do you think that affected the Huskies, and how important is it to get Caroline Ducharme and Easy Fudd back?
Well, definitely the depth was the deciding factor. And to have a disparity in bench points like that, 37-0, that is pretty absurd. And yet UConn only lost by how many points? 4 points?
7, yeah.
So, it's pretty incredible that UConn was able to hang with South Carolina given their depleted numbers. But, they need to get either AZ Fudd and or Caroline Ducharme back in the near future, just because they need more capable bodies. And you saw Ayanna Patterson. She was really the only one that played significant minutes off the bench. And you could see when she was in there that she did some meaningful things, but in terms of offense, she was slightly overmatched and she couldn't be on the floor for extended time. So with South Carolina having the numbers that they have and the capable players that they have, you could just see that, they had a distinct advantage. And that's not an excuse for UConn. Like Aaliyah Edwards said, they didn't come in thinking like, oh, we're an underdog, or like they still have that high expectation that they're capable of winning with the people that they have. And they certainly are. And they showed that with how close the game was. But unfortunately, you get into foul trouble and there's just nowhere else to turn.
I think that it's not even that those 6 players can't win that game. It's just that those 6 players are getting so exhausted that even adding back in Caroline, even if she's not fully at her scoring capabilities, will give one of those players a rest and not make them get into foul trouble so early, hopefully. Going to this, people were really focused on that Aaliyah Edwards versus Aaliyah Boston matchup, and rightfully so, with both of them having over 20 points. But a real threat was Cardoso, and the Huskies have this duo of 2 really powerful bigs, but they're usually not presented with 2 really powerful bigs as well to face. How do you think this was kind of a challenge for them?
Oh, it was such a challenge because you could tell right away that covering Aaliyah Boston and denying her the ball was a major part of the game plan, which is why she didn't have a field goal in the first half. But even Aaliyah Boston said that Cardoso was really the X factor, because then all of a sudden you have these 2 very capable bigs, and they were just, the offensive rebounds that they were able to get and convert into putbacks there was such a disparity there. So I think it was 25 O boards to UConn's 10, which is, again, a really insane, like drastic difference there. And so once again, for UConn to lose by 4, even with that sort of disparity is pretty remarkable. So I think, you know, Aaliyah Edwards and Dorka Juhas are a really powerful duo of bigs, but I think Dorka would probably tell you that she wasn't super happy with her contributions. And I think like having that body there is definitely something. So like even when Aaliyah wasn't scoring, just her presence on the floor alone is like a major impact, right? Because you have to account for her defensively, and then that opens up Cardoso. So I think that you know, unfortunately, Dorka couldn't convert a lot of those rebounds, and I don't know if that's just not being in the right position, or the other, you know, the Gamecocks just being way more aggressive and, you know, stealing those rebounds. But I think that was definitely a factor as well.
I remember especially one play, Cardoso literally 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, she had the rebound every single time and then finally put it back up. And it was kind of this tricky situation because they were getting into so much foul trouble that they were trying to avoid the fouling, but they were missing so many rebounds because of it. And I think that allowed her to be really successful. And the two of them, Boston and Cardoso, worked so well together. Boston having 26 and Cardoso having 17, while Aaliyah Edwards had 25 and Dorka only came up with around 5 points. So I think sometimes in games when they shut down Edwards, Juhas can turn it on, but with the South Carolina situation, they were both so on, and ours kind of couldn't be on at the same time, which I think created a pretty big issue.
It was like a perfect storm, you know. You want to get those rebounds, but that's where a lot of fouls were being called, were like those loose ball fouls off of the backboard. So there was very little that UConn could do except for box out better. And I don't think that they were boxing out to the level that they needed to. And that might have also been an effect of the fatigue and the exhaustion, where your reaction time is just a little bit slower.
I agree, especially because there was such foul trouble. Tennessee and South Carolina were both such physical games, and it kind of just proved how the SEC is a little bit more feisty than the Big East has been, and it kind of forced the Huskies to play defense differently. Did you think the Huskies did a good job with that physicality, and do you think it ended up creating so much more exhaustion because of their depleted roster?
Well, I would just start by saying I think the Big East actually is quite physical. I remember specifically against DePaul, Marquette, just a ton of physicality. The difference is that those other Big East teams don't have the size that these SEC teams have. And so, you know, in those matchups, Dorka and Aaliyah, you know, they have a size advantage and they know how to use their bodies. But when you're going up against, you know, a dominant Aaliyah Boston, and then you throw in Cardoso as well, that certainly presented a challenge. As far as the physicality and how they handled it, I actually think they handled it really well. And sure, like it's going to contribute to the fatigue, but the bigger issue was the foul calls. So it's not necessarily like they were playing poorly due to the physicality. It was just that, you know, both teams were being called for fouls. And if you look at the fouls on South Carolina's side, they're more spread out among all the rotation players. Whereas UConn only rotating, for the most part, 6 players, you have, you know, 3 players in foul trouble pretty much the whole game. And so the physicality just, it hindered them because of the foul trouble more so than because of their physical capability.
I completely agree. And there was a huge controversy with that officiating. We saw Coach Auriemma throw his water bottle on the court out of anger, ending up getting a technical. We find out later in the press conference, it was because he felt that Lou just got so beat up during that game. He said, if you want to bring her in, you'll see the bruises on her body. And with how many injuries the team faced, I guess he really wanted to make sure she didn't get hurt. And then another big controversy being that handoff, what looked like a handoff on the inbound play by South Carolina. What were your thoughts on the officiating and on the technical?
Well, I think Gino Auriemma has a point about the officiating. I've seen it with Lou a lot this season. She does get beat up. And I think part of the problem is that she does fight through it, and she's choosy about being vocal. She doesn't complain really. But I thought there were a few times where it looked like there might have been some jersey holding on her. I thought Zia Cook was all over her. I mean, just face guarding her the whole time. And I think I would have expected maybe one or two more fouls to be called on those instances. You did have a moment where Lou kind of was trying to rip through with the ball, and that was where you saw that contact with Zia Cook, which they ended up ruling incidental contact, and it was a blocking foul on her. But there were some of those instances throughout the game where I felt like she just wasn't free to move. But to Lou's credit, and Gino pointed this out, she really fought through it, and he said she was pissed. I guess I could see that, because in the second half she kind of showed that I'm going to get my shots no matter what, and I'm going to score no matter what you're doing. So, Lou ended up having a great game, but the technical by Gino was a mistake, and he said that, and I agree. Especially at that juncture in the game. Even though it's frustrating, and I could see his point and see that maybe some fouls should have been called that weren't, that juncture and the swing of points was costly. And I just don't think that in that moment it's going to help matters. But that being said, UConn still had a chance to win. It's not like they were sunk by that. I think it was something they had to overcome, which they did. But it was it was just a little too much pressure with people fouling out. South Carolina having a chance to get to the line and continue to sink free throws and extend the lead. So, was there another part to that question that I missed, or did I get it all? Oh, the handoff. Yeah. So the handoff, that was a missed call.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry. You're not allowed to just like hand the play, your teammate the ball in the out of bounds. I don't know how they missed it. It's something that in all levels of the game is frustrating, and that's the human element of officiating. But you expect that at a certain level, whether it's Division I elite level basketball or the NBA, we've seen it recently, where it drives you nuts that certain things can't be reviewed. And I think what it comes down to is, if there's no call, technically there's nothing to review. But that doesn't help you if there's a miscall, obviously. So it's just a little frustrating when it's something that seems pretty obvious and it's missed in the moment and there's nothing you can do about it. So again, UConn fought through that, and I think I was impressed with how they finished the game and just how they just continued to fight. And they really still had a chance to win up until the end, but they just didn't have the numbers to have enough people on the floor that could create offensively and could sort of will them to victory.
I think the inbound play was incredibly frustrating, especially because they were really focusing on UConn's inbounding. I think we got like 2 5-second calls, and then for them to miss that, it was kind of just upsetting that they were so focused on ours, but they couldn't even catch that one.
I agree.
And I think another reason Coach Auriemma's technical was frustrating was because there's 1,000 things you could say of why we didn't win the game. There's 4 points missing in so many other places. But the fact that they get up 2 foul shots and then they get possession again, that's 4 points right there. So thinking about it, it could have been an overtime situation, especially because of how well composed our players were during it. Like the fact that Lou was dealing with all of this, but she didn't get a technical herself. I think she did a great job of just staying composed and focusing on herself. So I think it's just upsetting of how it played out. I get why he was frustrating, but it just was 4 points that could have been maybe not had.
Well, in these types of games, it's really a game of inches, like literally and figuratively. Like there are only so many possessions, and there were a few key points in the game where, like, for instance, you mentioned the turnovers on the 5 seconds, which I thought seemed they seemed quick to me. And you know, I was watching on TV, so you're just like, okay, wow, that's crazy. And then there was another one where I'm not sure if it was Aubrey, but on an inbounds play, they said that whoever was taking out the ball stepped over the line on UConn. And so that's 3 possessions on inbounds that end up going towards South Carolina. And then, like you said, you know, when South Carolina inbounds the ball and they miss that call, it's like, you know, I can obviously see how that's frustrating. And there's, like you said, there are many, you know, plays throughout the game, many reasons that UConn was not the better team yesterday. But whenever it's something to do with officiating, it's kind of just like, it's one of those things that it is what it is. Both teams technically have to deal with it. And depending on how certain things shake out, sometimes you feel like your team's dealing with it more than the other team, but you can only control what you can. And that was another thing that I think Gino would probably admit was made that a bad decision, is because that was something he could control. You know, sort of his reaction and his behavior is something that is controllable, as opposed to, you know, a call or a non-call that a ref makes that you just have to live with.
Yeah, there were so many uncontrollables in that game that I think that that's just something that you look back on, because it's like, that's one of the things we could have changed. But putting aside all the external factors of the game, what did you think about the Huskies' overall performance? And do you think anyone has improved exceptionally since the beginning of this season or last year?
Well, overall, it was an amazing performance, especially given, actually, I don't even want to say given all the injuries, because that's kind of not fair to the players that did play. You know what I mean? Like, it was a good performance regardless how many people were available. It was a good performance. They're the reigning national champs. They're undefeated, South Carolina, and UConn gave them a fight till the very end. And as you said, they only lost by 4. So I think overall it was great. I think, you know, I already sort of touched on, you would have liked to have more threes. And that's an area where I think Dorka could have helped. And I know she doesn't have the highest 3-point percentage, but she is certainly capable of hitting a 3. Let's see, did she have any 3-point attempts? She was 0 of 3 from 3-point land. And that's tough. And then, you know, she had 6 rebounds, 1 offensive rebound. 7 total, 6 defensive, 1 offensive. So again, you would have liked to have more offensive rebounding in general. Like I said, like that disparity is just nuts. Like I said, the 25-10. And then for Yana, you know, coming off the bench, as I mentioned before, I think she did make some impactful plays, some hustle plays. Her minutes were incredibly crucial, but also she needs to be relied upon for rebounding. Like that, she might not be up to speed quite yet offensively and have the ability to create or score at will. And I understand that. But what she can do is rebound the ball. And that's something that, you know, she needs. And she had no rebounds in 14 minutes. That's crazy. And so that's, you know, something that I think the coaching staff is going to be working with her on, just like being in the right position and just using her body to box out. And those are really my only criticisms. I thought, you know, Nika had, you know, maybe one or two mistakes or turnovers. She had 3 turnovers. But otherwise was played phenomenally well, as we've come to expect from her. I thought the way that Aaliyah Edwards and Aubrey Griffin played while under foul trouble was so impressive. Like the fact that they had, you know, they were in foul trouble most of the game and they were still able to be effective was amazing. But I would say Nika, Aubrey, Lou, and Aaliyah all played their game. Like they all did what they do well. They all were able to score. Aubrey was attacking the basket. Nika was, you know, dishing the rock. She had actually only 4 assists, but what she did do was step up on the scoring end. And I, you know, one thing that I said yesterday, you know, while watching the game is Nika has this knack for understanding when she is needed to score. And I think that's really impressive. So she'll be content to dish the ball, but she can recognize when she needs to be more aggressive and actually sort of change her role and become a scorer. And I've been noticing her do that a lot more, where she's driving to the basket, being aggressive. And we already know she's like sort of the energy of this team, and that gives her team energy. Like when she sort of puts on the Jets and goes all the way to the rim and finishes, that is such an energy boost for her team. So I think you asked, you know, who's really improved over the last, let's say the last year or so. Nika is definitely one. I think every single aspect of her game has improved. Like I know turnovers have been an issue generally, but considering who UConn has had at their disposal and the limitations that they've had, particularly at the guard position, like for her to be leading the nation in assists, like I can live with a couple turnovers for sure. And everything else has improved. Her 3-point shooting, she doesn't hesitate anymore, right? If she's open on a 3, she pulls it and she makes a lot of them. She's a more capable scorer, as I already mentioned. And you know, it's intangible. We've talked about it before. She's sort of the heart and soul of the team. And she's under a lot of pressure. And I feel like she's really handled it. I mean, most games, like, you know, yesterday was another one, 39 minutes, like, and when she's off the floor, you notice it, right? She's missed when she's off the floor. Now, as far as let's talk about Aaliyah. Aaliyah, I mean, her season has been incredible. Like if you look at the numbers from last year to this year, she has really taken ownership of, I need to be the go-to player. You know, I need to make something happen on defense and on offense. And she has answered the bell every time. You know, I think against Villanova and was it against Providence? There were a couple games recently where it seemed like maybe fatigue got to her a little bit. But for the most part, like there's really very little you can criticize about Aaliyah. Like she is just, she's stepped up. She has really stepped up. She's become dominant. You know, she's demanding the ball. And I think she did that yesterday. And I think she went toe to toe with Aaliyah Boston. Like she was just as good as Aaliyah Boston yesterday. And she deserves some recognition, and she deserves some buzz for, you know, being in the All-American conversation and even being in the National Player of the Year conversation. So, I mean, her improvement is just, it's immeasurable. And then the other one that I wanted to talk about was Aubrey Griffin, just because, I mean, she didn't play at all last year. And her growth from her freshman year to now is like insane. Like she always has had an athletic ability that really very few others have, period, but no one else on the team has. And when she drives to the rim, she's virtually unguardable. And I just love seeing how much more assertive she is offensively and how much her range has expanded, her shot selection, her confidence. She's been so impressive. So yeah, I mean, those 3, I think, are kind of the the big three of not only like impact players, but like most improved players for UConn.
I think if we think back to like July, we would never have maybe thought that this would be the starting lineup, but they have such an interesting balance and they accept roles as they come and they're able to adapt. I think it really gets under Nika's skin when people don't scout her out as a scorer. So she will take over in that moment. And she makes really good plays because she knows that they're not expecting her to take on that ability. I think they just do such a good job of picking up for when someone else doesn't do something. And I think there's just such a good balance of scoring, assisting, defense all around between the five of them that it's not what we would have pictured, but it's worked out really well for them.
For sure. And we talked about, AZ and Caroline, and when you have other shooting threats, I mean, it just opens up everything. And then also, of course, you have a little bit of time to breathe for some of those starters. And, UConn can go a little smaller if they need to, and they can have, Dorka or Aaliyah at the 5, and then have, some of the other starters, but then like swap in AZ or Caroline. And what's incredible and sort of the blessing in disguise of all of this and this entire season is that Aubrey has improved the way she has. Nika has improved the way she has. And so when you then add in a couple other variables, some of the best shooters in the country, you're just so much better now than you might have been otherwise. And, the minutes, while tiresome, have been extremely beneficial, especially to players like Aubrey and Nika, who, in the past may have made a mistake or two and gotten pulled, so they've had the luxury of playing through whatever's happening. If there's a mistake, they play through it, and it's made them so much better. And I mean, even just having one of those two other players available would have changed the entire complexion of the game against South Carolina. And, it seems like Caroline might be back sometime this week, and hopefully AZ will follow suit at some point after that. And, Gino mentioned, she feels like, well before March, she should be able to play. And you just hope that they get some time back on the court together, back building the chemistry. And then, the postseason is the postseason, and, just having a couple more bodies that you can depend on is just going to make things sort of wide open for UConn.
There's really nothing good about injury, but the only silver lining is that I don't know if these players would have developed in the way that they did if it wasn't for that. And then once you add in other elements, it becomes so much more dominant, especially with the fact that if you're watching that game not knowing anything about UConn yesterday, you're not really realizing they're depleted. You're just thinking they have 5 really good players who start and stay in during the game. And I think that's something really special. After the win, UConn moved up to number 4 in the nation. South Carolina stays ranked number 1. And although that was one of their biggest games of the season, I don't think they should take the Big East too lightly, as there's definitely a lot of competition within it. They're traveling to Wisconsin this Wednesday to face Marquette, Georgetown on Saturday, both teams that could definitely cause a little chaos. So excited for those, but just want to thank you, Maria, for coming on the show.
Thank you again.
Yeah, everyone tune in on Wednesday and Saturday. And
on SNY.
On SNY. Tune in to Maria. And thank you so much for watching.